Imagine for a moment that the world around you is collapsing. The streets you once walked to get coffee are now filled with jagged rubble, and the familiar sound of birds has been replaced by the low, haunting hum of drones or the distant rhythmic thunder of artillery. Your main concerns have shifted to the most basic elements of survival. Where's the nearest shelter? Is there any bread left at the bakery? And is the water from the tap still safe to drink? Now imagine that in the middle of this high-stakes survival game, you feel that familiar dull ache in your lower back and realize with a sinking heart that your period is starting. In a normal world, this is a minor inconvenience, a quick trip to the pharmacy or a reach into the bathroom cabinet, but in a war zone, those options simply do not exist because the pharmacy was bombed or looted weeks ago, the cabinet is empty, and the water you need to stay clean is more precious than gold. This is the silent crisis of conflict, a monthly battle fought by millions of people that rarely makes the evening news or the front pages. We talk about ammunition, geopolitics, and casualty counts, but we almost never talk about the logistics of menstruation under fire. Today, we are going into the reality of what it means to manage a period when the world is falling apart. Looking at the dangerous lengths people go to stay clean, the biological toll that war takes on the body, and why a simple pad can sometimes be as valuable as a bullet. Most of us take for granted the infrastructure that supports our basic hygiene, the toilets that flush, and the supply chain that ensures every store has an aisle dedicated to menstrual products. But in a conflict zone, that infrastructure is the first thing to go. When a city is besieged, the supply chain snaps, and trucks carrying hygiene products are blocked at checkpoints or diverted for medical supplies like bandages and morphine, because in the hierarchy of humanitarian aid, menstrual products have historically been treated as an afterthought or a luxury rather than a necessity. This creates a vacuum filled with desperation, where creativity can be deadly. In places like Gaza, Ukraine, or Yemen, people use scraps of old clothing, pieces of torn-up tents, or even pages from notebooks to manage their flow. These improvised materials are rarely sterile, and using dirty rags for days at a time leads to a massive spike in urinary tract infections and the life-threatening risk of toxic shock syndrome in a place where hospitals are too overwhelmed with shrapnel wounds to spare antibiotics for a preventable infection. Then there's the issue of water, which is often weaponized in war. When pumps are targeted and pipes are severed, you're left with a heartbreaking choice. Do you use your 2 liters of daily water to stay hydrated, or do you use it to wash a menstrual rag? Most choose the former, leading to the prolonged use of soiled materials that cause chemical-like burns and severe rashes against the skin. Privacy also vanishes. When you're living in a crowded school basement or a thin plastic tent with 50 other families, there's no private place to change or wash, and the deep stigma of menstruation remains even in the middle of a war. Many people isolate themselves in dangerous areas or skip food distributions just to avoid the shame of a visible stain, making them even more vulnerable to the conflict around them. It's a common myth that the body enters a survival mode where the cycle pauses, but for many, the chronic stress of war triggers a flood of cortisol that makes periods significantly worse. Imagine dealing with heavy, prolonged bleeding for weeks while fleeing on foot, carrying your children and only belongings, with no access to a toilet. The ironical truth is that while aid organizations often treat these products as secondary, they're one of the most requested items on the ground. The Dignity Kit, containing pads and soap, is more than hygiene. It's a reclamation of personhood and a message that your basic humanity matters when the world is trying to erase it. Even these kits faced obstacles, from being seen as taboo by male-led committees to being confiscated at borders because they're not viewed as essential medicine. Furthermore, the disposal of these products in a city with no garbage collection creates secondary health hazards, whether they're burned for toxic fumes or buried in soil meant for food. Why does this matter to us? Because the way a society treats basic biological needs during a crisis is the ultimate litmus test for its humanity. When we ignore the period problem, we say that half the population's survival is less important. A girl who cannot manage her period in a displacement camp is a girl who will not attend the makeshift school, and a mother suffering from infection cannot care for her family. Managing menstruation in a war zone is an act of quiet, stubborn resistance, a refusal to let the chaos of the outside world dictate the sanctity of the body. If you want to help, look for organizations that provide these kits and recognize that providing the means to care for one's own body is the most direct way to restore agency in a world that has taken everything else away. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into a topic too often left in the shadows. The more we talk about these invisible struggles, the harder they become to ignore.